Okay, so round two of the video reviews. The final lessons in the executive branch unit that you were supposed to have dealt with something referred to as the bureaucracy, the part of the government that is below the surface, the non-political part of it. Very much we study the tip of the iceberg, the secretaries, the president, etc. But the vast majority of the work is done by professionals, hundreds of thousands of them, that are there from one president to another. So it's going to be broken up into two discussions, one about the people who comprise the bureaucracy, and the other about its power and limitations in our government today. And obviously, as we speak, that situation is evolving. Okay, first the term bureaucracy. It refers to a complex organization that has three qualities. It's not terribly complicated. There is a hierarchy of structure. One level reports to another level, reports to another level. Within each box in that organizational chart, individual or individuals have assigned task, referred to as job specialization. And finally, all of this is not done ad hoc, that they don't make it up as they go along. They have formalized systems, formalized rules of procedure, etc. Some obviously in much more detail than others. The current situation where now you see this ad hoc task force, the coronavirus task force, that very much is a make it up as we go along. Most of the bureaucracy doesn't work that way. You'll also refer to this slide that there is this myth, if you will, that the bureaucracy is a bad thing. And generally speaking, when people are asked about the bureaucracy as a whole, it tends not to have a very favorable rating. And that, as you see in the picture, is what Ronald Reagan capitalized on in his campaign. However, most people have connections to actual government agencies that provide services to them, and generally they like it. They depend on it, and that's part of that thing we talked about already, the iron triangle. So there's sort of mixed messages when it comes to the bureaucracy. The other, that it's all Washington, D.C. based. You see the statistics there, that it's actually most of the people are out there in the field. And the size in terms of numbers of people has largely been stable for the federal government, as you see. The growth has been in state workers who are oftentimes carrying out functions courtesy of those federal dollars that come as part of cooperative or coercive federalism. So the next set of slides deal with how the people who are in the bureaucracy got there, from the initial handful in 1789 to the hundreds of thousands we have today. It should not be too much of a reach for you to remember that most people who worked for the government prior to the 1880s were political appointees. It was a system referred to as patronage, nicknamed the spoil system by Andrew Jackson, that as parties developed, they used these appointments to customs houses on the coast, obviously, to post office positions as rewards for their local party organizers. So there was very much a mesh between the political party that won the presidency and the government that was producing services, albeit pretty limited services for the public. After the assassination of Garfield, that gave impetus to a move to reform that it had become viewed as corrupt, and so corrupting, in fact, it led to the assassination of the president. So the Republicans pushed through the Pendleton Act, the Civil Service Act in the 1880s, that they thought was a winner for them, a win-win. It got them public credit for having done something about patronage, but they thought they had an escape valve in that the only jobs that would apply under the Civil Service Act would be designated by the president, and they believed their president, Chester A. Arthur, who was considered to be a beneficiary of patronage, would not designate that many people. He went ahead and designated quite a healthy chunk right out of the gate. As a result, he was denied the nomination of the Republican Party. They ended up losing the presidency anyway the following election in 1884. So we established this professional service that grew and grew and grew and grew till now it's probably 98% of the federal employment of the people who work in the federal government are hired through this professional system. On the previous slide, you have also noticed something called the Hatch Act, passed in the late 1930s. The Republicans sort of insisted on it because there was a massive growth in the number of federal employees courtesy of the New Deal, and then unexpectedly courtesy of the Second World War. And the Republicans felt there was going to be an influx of employees to the federal government who were going to have received their jobs courtesy of the Democratic Party creating the jobs, not necessarily hiring the individual, but there would be this sort of natural allegiance to the Democratic Party because they were the ones that created these jobs. They might not necessarily be responsible for hiring the particular bureaucrat, but there was this concern that it would be a benefit to the Democratic Party. So political activity by federal employees is prohibited, dating back to the late 1930s. You'll also see a couple other items on the previous slides. The Office of Personnel Management is the one that runs the hiring, if you will, for the federal bureaucracy. The GS rating is the scale on which bureaucrats, the bulk of them, are paid. In the, I want to say it was the 70s, it may be the 80s, there was a concern that for growing technical professional positions, the federal government was losing out to the private sector because they just couldn't offer the kind of money the private sector could. So a non-GS scale system called the Senior Executive Service was created to give more flexibility in offering a little more pay to get those professionals. I mean, I would assume that, and I don't know for a fact, but I have to believe that Dr. Fauci, who we see on the news all the time, with the coronavirus task force, is probably an example of that, of a hiree under the Senior Executive Service. And then the other final slide talks about a plum book that are sort of the usual suspects, if you will, for either the Democrat or the Republican who becomes president, as they go to appoint all these lower positions, deputy undersecretaries and chargé d'affaires in countries, etc., that is political. I mean, it is patronage. It was and has been still a struggle for Trump because he didn't have that built-in connection to those people, and there were a lot of people maybe in the standard Republican book that were leery of a Trump presidency. So there are many, many positions still unfilled, partly because he just hasn't picked anybody, and partly of dragging the Senate, dragging the feet and approving the ones that need presidential approval. These last slides just go over again what we've talked about previously, and those are those outlier organizations in the executive branch that don't fit under the major cabinet departments. And you'd seen a slide previously, I believe it laid out the top structure of the Interior Department. I don't want to say the most important, but probably given the crisis we're in right now, one of the most important ones, if not the most important one, is going to be these regulatory commissions. The Securities and Exchange Commission is certainly going to have a lot to do with trying to recover our markets, and certainly the Federal Reserve Board is going to play a role as best it can, as much as it can, in monetary policy and trying to dig us out of this coronavirus recession that we're entering. Those independent agencies, because they are tasked with regulating an aspect of the economy, there was a concern about them being too political, so they are led by commissions, multiple members, who have staggered set terms, usually long enough to overlap presidencies, and staggered in a way that, particularly with the two-term limit, there's generally almost no way a president could be responsible for having chosen everybody on a particular commission. They do require Senate confirmation. The president cannot just fire them like you could the Secretary of State. There has to be some legal cause, and that can be a point of contention. The independent presidential agencies, NASA, the EPA, for various reasons just didn't fit, or there were political considerations to keep them, to make the choosing of a particular department to put them in impossible. So why put them anywhere? We'll just have them be independent presidential agencies. And then we do have the post office was turned into a quasi-corporation. Amtrak runs in a similar fashion. Neither one is terribly profitable, but the president is also responsible for choosing board members to that. I believe Congress plays a role in those as well. Numerically, certainly the post office makes up a large number of the employees who get paid by the federal government, and the post office is one of the initial sources of federal employment, one of the primary patronage jobs that could be doled out.